Hello everybody, tis I, yes, yours truly. I meant to make this video yesterday, but I was having some issues with my phone, so hopefully I got that squared away. Anyway, yesterday I took a small little tour around Michilimackinac Fort, which is right behind me. Just to give a slight little history lesson, this fort was built by the French in 1715. The French settlers that were here were doing a lot of trades with the Ojibwa tribe. They were always doing gift exchanges and fur trading, which was very big at the time. Now, the fort itself never saw actual combat. However, during the French-Indian War, Britain was gaining a lot of territory. They were pretty successful in gaining a lot of land in North America as well as Canada. It was around 1761, I believe, Britain had taken over Quebec and Montreal. When the French soldiers learned about this unfortunate event, they decided that because the supply route had been now cut off, staying there would be futile. So naturally, they packed up what they could and left the fort. And most likely probably went to Louisiana, if any place. Or maybe even back to France, who knows. But at any rate, when in 1761, after the French left, Britain came into the area and even took over the fort. And, well, the British might have been respectable to the Canadian way of life. And what I mean by that is that when Britain took over, or were successful in the war and took over Canada, they looked at the Canadians and said, well, here's the thing. You're going to be no longer French, you're going to be English. However, you can still keep your land, your businesses, your religion, whatever. You can keep it, live your way of life, but you're going to be under English rule now. And that's just how it was. Now, towards the Ojibwas, England was not really totally respectable to their way of life. In fact, they, unlike the French, who, not saying they treated the natives any better, but at least the French understood the people, they understood their culture, their way of life, and to keep a friendly relations with everything, you know, they did simple gift exchanges and, well, it's fur trading, which kept everyone happy. England did not really do that. So, after England was kind of making their mark on everything, and we're not doing gift exchanges with the Ojibwas and forcing them to do fur trades at certain times, this was really, really irritating them. To a point where they basically said the British have got to go. Two Ojibwa warriors came up with a brilliant idea to storm the fort. On June 2nd, 1763, the Ojibwas were playing Bakatiwa. We're playing a game known as Bakatiwa. Bakatiwa was a sport, like the modern day type of lacrosse. And as they were playing their game right outside the fort, which was common, so the British didn't really worry about it. The native women were also watching the game, and they had blankets with them, strangely enough, but underneath these blankets were knives and tomahawks. And when one of the natives threw the ball over the wall and into the fort, you know, the Ojibwas were running towards the gate. Everyone thought, well, they're just going to grab the ball, but when they got to a certain point, they ran towards the native women who uncovered the blankets or took the blankets off of them, and the Ojibwa warriors grabbed the knives and tomahawks, charged into the fort, and killing at least 15 British soldiers and I think 1 civilian. The rest of the soldiers were taken captive. And eventually were being escorted to other territories. Now, I'm not exactly sure what they were going to do with them, but 5 of the British soldiers later on were killed for some kind of ritual of some sort. I don't really know what it was. And, well, later on, another native tribe, the Ottawa tribe, just happened to come across their path. Now, I'm not exactly sure what it was that they did or said, but they managed to convince the Ojibwa tribes to hand over the British soldiers that they had captured. And the Ottawa tribe took these British soldiers back to English territory, and basically said to them, well, we saved your soldiers. And even though they tried denying that, well, they obviously did not have any involvement in it, but they tried to deny in terms of having any idea what was going on, which was kind of odd, considering that a lot of these native tribes are next door neighbors and they're usually fully aware of what's going to happen. But the English high command basically said, well, you know what, they saved our soldiers, so we're gonna let it be. And the Ottawa tribe actually had good connections with the English after that. Then in 1764, you would think that after that incident, Britain would want to stay out of this area, but strangely enough, they wanted to come back. The Ojibwas were not thrilled on the idea of England or of English settlers coming back, but at the same token, better to have someone here than no one. The trading and everything was a real big thing, and if you have outside settlers who still bring things in from the other world, you know, kind of have little to no choice in the matter. But the Ojibwas were willing to give the English a second chance. However, they had to make certain changes, such as reviving some of the French way of life in terms of gift exchanging, as well as doing fur trades, but on certain conditions. The English were no longer supposed to force them to do it, which is more like hey, do you want to do a trade, so to speak. And from that moment on, the English and the Ojibwas finally got along and had no issues. Now, after several years, the fort in 1779 was given a new commander, Lieutenant Governor Sinclair. Lieutenant Governor Sinclair wasn't overly thrilled of the fort's location. He just thought it was too vulnerable. And in a sense, he was right. With him being a naval commander during the 1760s, he basically knew should enemy ships come along this area, the fort could easily be bombarded. So on one particular day, he got into a canoe and started going into the lakes. There are plenty of islands around this area, but he just happened to see one particular island, and he knew it would be a perfect place. After he examined it, he said he basically decided to move Fort Michilimackinac to what is now known as Mackinac Island. Now, it was around, I think in 1781, British engineers came to see what Lieutenant Governor Sinclair had been doing. And when they saw the fort that he'd been building, they were all kind of disgusted. The fort was not up to certain expectations. And eventually, in 1782, Lieutenant Governor Sinclair was relieved of his command. He wasn't necessarily punished or disciplined, but because of all the time and effort that, including money, that he spent to build Fort Mackinac, and obviously did not do a very good job of it, it really did not end well. So he got relieved and was assigned to do other duties, to what I have no idea. But so from that moment on, Fort Mackinac went through some construction or reconstruction, and that's where the fort has been ever since. Now I know some of you are thinking, why just not move back to Fort Michilimackinac? Well, here's the thing. When Lieutenant Governor Sinclair decided to move everything to Fort Mackinac, whatever he could not take with him, he burnt to the ground. So the fort that I actually just showed you is a reconstruction of what the fort would have looked like back when it was first built in 1715. Now, Fort Mackinac had not seen any real-life combat. However, I want to say around the 1790s, early 1800s, Britain basically just abandoned the fort, and they weren't getting it. There was just no purpose for it, and at least in their eyes, there obviously just was no purpose for it. So they just left it. And eventually, when American settlers came in, the U.S. military took over the fort and just became, at the time, an ordinary outpost. Now, in 1812, when England decided to try to retake America, the defenders at Fort Mackinac were completely unaware of what was going on. In fact, on one particular day, when the defenders looked out in the field, they noticed that hundreds of British, along with some Native American warriors, were outside nearby the tree line. With only 60 defenders against hundreds, maybe even close to 1,000 enemy soldiers, they knew that defending the fort would result in death. So when the British demanded that they surrendered, they naturally complied with the order. Whatever happened to those soldiers, I'm not sure, whether they were sent to POW camps or even possibly just said, okay, go home, whatever, I don't know. But at any rate, during the War of 1812, Fort Mackinac, along with the island, remained under British control. In 1814, the American High Command decided to try and make an effort to regain the island, which resulted in total defeat. The American soldiers that went on to Mackinac, it was not fought at the fort. It was actually fought behind the fort, like half a mile, 3/4 of a mile from where the fort was located. It was a land battle, and during the fire exchanges, the American colonel, I can't remember his name, told Major Holmes to find a route behind the English and to flank them. But as he was leading his men into the woods, little did they know there was a Native American tribe, I don't know what they were called, but they were hiding in the woods and ambushed Major Holmes and his men. Major Holmes was killed, and during the confusion, the soldiers retreated back to their lines, and more confusion came because then eventually the natives were harassing the American soldiers, as well as the British were harassing or attacking from the front, and it just became a cluster, a big cluster. So eventually American soldiers retreated back to the ships. And just when you think, okay, it can't get any worse, well, there were 2 U.S. ships right outside the island, preventing any kind of supplies from coming in. And the British, desperate for supplies, in the middle of the night, did a daring raid on both the ships and took them over, both of them. The American High Command basically said, we're not going to make any more attempts to regain the island. It was just a lost cause. But eventually, when the war was over and England had lost, the island and everything with it was handed right back to us. What choice did they have? They had to give it back. Now, from that moment on, there was no more combat on Mackinac Island. However, during the American Civil War, it was used as a POW camp for Confederate soldiers. Now, I know some of you are thinking, that's also a pretty small fort, but here's the thing. It wasn't just for ordinary soldiers. It was only for certain Confederate, what's the word I'm looking for? Someone who had a certain status or a title. So, for an example, when the war first broke out and we eventually took over Tennessee, there were certain judges and lawyers, even a militia commander, were apprehended and got sent to Mackinac. Now, because there was some construction, they were building some things, those men actually got housed in what is now one of the hotels on the island, but then eventually got sent back to the fort. And while they were there, certain politicians, I think from Detroit, if I remember correctly, came to the island and were trying to convince these men, the importance of the Union, why we should stick together, or why the whole nation should still be connected as one, instead of being cut in half. Now, a lot of these lawyers and judges basically gave in and swore loyalty to the Union. The militia commander, on the other hand, his heart was for the cause of the Confederacy. He could not be manipulated in any way, shape, or form to swear loyalty to the Union. And eventually, that particular commander, I honestly can't remember his name was not brought to my attention. I don't know what his name was, but I just know the simple facts. He was eventually removed from Mackinac Island to a different POW camp, where eventually he died to health complications. And after that, after the Civil War was over, Mackinac just became an ordinary outpost. Any soldier that got stationed there was there to primarily just protect state property. That's really all they did. There was no more wars, there was no more conflicts, and eventually, I want to say the U.S. military kind of lost interest in the fort. There was really no reason to send soldiers there. I think it was around the 1900s. But eventually, somewhere, I don't know what year it was, it became a tourist attraction. Where now tourists, even from all over the world, can actually now see this fort. And they even got actors that will dress up as soldiers from the 1880s and do really cool demonstrations, firing cannons or rifles, whatever they have. Well, at any rate, that's the history lesson. Hope you all enjoyed that. And I'm going to try to make the best of this day. And, well, till then, stay safe and stay in touch.